He paced his chambers alone, muttering under his breath. He poured himself a glass of scotch, then another, then abandoned the glass entirely and drank straight from the bottle. He slammed his fists on the desk, the sound echoing off the ancient walls. How could this happen? How could he be so blind? How could I have let this happen? His words bounced around the room, unanswered. The portraits of ancestors, Elizabeth, George VI, Victoria, stared down at him silently, as though judging him from beyond the grave. This wasn't just about Harry. It wasn't just about Archie. It was about the monarchy itself. If word of this scandal leaked, the damage would be catastrophic. For centuries, the monarchy had survived precisely because its bloodline was seen as sacred, unbroken. Remove that illusion, and the institution crumbles. Charles imagined the headlines: royal bloodline exposed. Archie not Harry's son. Monarchy's future in doubt. The thought made him shiver. He saw the newspapers plastered across breakfast tables, the anchors on morning television shows smirking as they dissected the Windsor family's greatest humiliation. He heard the laughter of critics, Republicans, those who had always wanted to see the monarchy fall. And then he imagined something worse: the people, ordinary Britons, betrayed. Taxpayers demanding answers, questioning why their money supported a family built on deceit. Crowds gathering outside Buckingham Palace, not to cheer, but to jeer. He pictured angry chants, banners, the monarchy's approval ratings plummeting to depths from which they could never recover. The monarchy doesn't survive without the people's faith, and faith, once broken, never returns. Charles collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, he was not the King of England. He was a father, a grandfather, a man who saw his family tearing itself apart from within. He thought of Diana, of how she had been swallowed by this machine, of how her truth had rocked the monarchy decades earlier. And now, her youngest son was at the center of a new disaster, one that might prove fatal. Would Diana have seen this coming? Would she have warned him? The thought haunted him. Hours passed. Charles ranted, wept, sat in silence. At one point, he threw a crystal glass into the fireplace, watching it shatter into glittering shards. At another, he stood before the mirror, staring at his own pale face, whispering, "You are the king. Act like it. Act like it." But he couldn't. Not that night. That night, Charles was simply a man trapped between impossible choices. Because what was he to do now? Confront Meghan? Expose her? Protect Harry from the truth he refused to accept? Or bury the results so deep no one would ever find them? Each option carried disaster. Silence meant living under a ticking time bomb. Exposure meant detonating it immediately. And all the while, the clock ticked. Time never stops, even when lives do. By dawn, Charles was exhausted, drained, his eyes red from tears and sleeplessness. He slumped in his chair, staring at the papers on his desk. Those damning words stared back at him, indifferent to his suffering. No paternal match. And then came the knock on the door. It was soft, hesitant, almost fearful. Charles looked up, his heart heavy. "Enter," he croaked. An aide stepped inside, pale and nervous. "Your Majesty, there's something you need to see." Charles frowned. He had no strength left for more bad news. "What is it now?" The aide hesitated, then held out a folder. "It's already spreading, sir. Not the results, not yet. But rumors. Someone has spoken." Charles's heart sank. He snatched the folder, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. Inside were clippings, online screenshots, whispers beginning to take shape in the press. Not the truth, but speculation. Louder, more insistent than before. Sources close to the palace suggest tensions over Archie's parentage. Unusual medical secrecy reignites paternity questions. DNA whispers refuse to die. Charles slammed the folder shut, his face ashen. The meltdown in private was over. Now came the meltdown in public. Because once rumors take root in the press, truth has no place to hide. The king rose from his chair, gripping the arms as though to steady himself. His voice was low, but firm. "God help us all. It's begun." But what he didn't yet realize was that the next blow wouldn't come from the press. It would come from inside the family, and it would be devastating. Every fortress falls, not from the walls outside, but from the cracks within. For the monarchy, those cracks came not from foreign powers, not from protesters, not even from relentless tabloids. They came from within the palace itself. Because the truth is simple, there is always a leaker. The monarchy runs on secrecy, but secrecy is brittle. Too many people know too many things. Advisors, aides, medical staff, security officers, every one of them a potential weak link. And when scandal brews this explosive, silence becomes unbearable. Some leak out of spite, some out of guilt, some out of greed. But one way or another, the truth always finds its way out. It started small. A whisper to a friend in a pub. A late-night message sent to a journalist who had been cultivating sources for years. You won't believe what's going on inside the palace, one insider allegedly teased. No names, no proof, just hints. But hints are all the press needs to start digging. And dig they did. Within days, reporters who had once been chasing royal baby pictures were now piecing together fragments of a much darker story. DNA test. No match. Crisis talks. The words floated in newsrooms, unverified but irresistible. Editors smelled blood. Inside the palace, paranoia spread faster than truth. Who had spoken? Who had betrayed the crown? Charles demanded answers. Senior aides scrambled to reassure him, but suspicion poisoned every interaction. A butler dismissed without warning. An assistant abruptly reassigned. A medical advisor quietly vanished from staff. But still, the leaks continued. Some suspected it was a disillusioned courtier, tired of the monarchy's secrets. Others whispered it was someone in Harry's camp, trying to get ahead of the story before the palace could weaponize it against him. A few even suggested Meghan herself, master strategist, queen of narrative, might have allowed just enough to slip into the press to paint herself as the victim once again. Whoever it was, the effect was devastating. Headlines began to sharpen, no longer vague, no longer cautious. Palace in turmoil over Archie's parentage. Secret DNA test rumors rock Windsor household. King and Prince Harry at odds over bombshell results. Though the articles tiptoed carefully, citing anonymous sources, the message was clear. The story was leaking, and the monarchy was losing control. Now imagine being Charles in those days. Already broken by the results, already shaken by his private meltdown, he now faced a war on two fronts, holding his family together while keeping the press at bay. Every morning, his aides laid newspapers before him like weapons. Every headline cut deeper. Harry was no calmer. When the first story broke, he exploded. "This is you," he shouted at his father. "You leaked this. You've wanted to destroy me from the start." His paranoia grew, fueled by Meghan's whispers. He cut ties with old friends, barked at aides, refused to take calls from his brother. His world shrank to a circle of two, himself and Meghan, while the rest of the monarchy became the enemy. And Meghan? She was composed. Too composed. While Harry raged, Meghan strategized. "This is our chance," she told him quietly. "If the story breaks, we control it. Not them. We tell the world how they've persecuted us, how they've invaded our lives, how they've tried to use science to humiliate us. We'll turn this against them." Her calm unnerved the palace. Charles's aides began whispering that Meghan wasn't just reacting, she was maneuvering. And if she had her hands on the narrative, she could weaponize it in ways the monarchy could never match. Meanwhile, the press sharpened its knives. Journalists who had long courted royal gossip now smelled the biggest scandal in decades. Leaks were verified. Sources cross-checked. Legal teams prepped articles, careful to avoid libel but ruthless in their detail. And then, late one night, Charles received the news he feared most. An aide entered his study, pale as chalk. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "the Times has it. They're preparing to publish." Charles's blood ran cold. He slumped back in his chair, his face pale, his body trembling. "God help us," he whispered. "It's out of our hands now. Because once the press moves, there is no stopping it. Once ink touches paper, once pixels flash across a screen, the world knows. And when the world knows, the monarchy bleeds." The king closed his eyes, his hands trembling as he whispered the words he had dreaded for weeks. "This is the end." But what Charles didn't realize was that the press wasn't the only threat. Because inside the palace itself, someone was preparing to go further. Someone ready not just to leak whispers, but to leak proof. And that proof, when revealed, would send shockwaves that no crown could withstand. The results were incomplete. The sample, the test, the analysis, it hadn't given a definitive answer. The lab had flagged irregularities. More testing would be needed. And that single word, inconclusive, was worse than anything. Because inconclusive meant uncertainty. Inconclusive meant more whispers. Inconclusive meant the scandal wasn't over. It was only beginning. Harry's reaction was volcanic. He slammed the papers onto the desk, shouting, "What does this mean? Inconclusive? How can it be inconclusive?" His voice cracked with rage and fear. He demanded answers no one could give. Charles, pale and shaken, whispered, "It means we cannot know. Not yet." But his tone betrayed him. He was terrified, because in the world of royals, not yet might as well mean never. And Meghan, though not present, her shadow hung over the room. Harry's first words after his fury subsided were bitter. "She will never forgive this. Never." He knew Meghan would see the test itself as betrayal, proof that the family was out to destroy her. And perhaps, in some ways, she would be right. But here's the cruel irony. The very act meant to silence the whispers had only fed them. If results couldn't provide certainty, doubt would thrive. And doubt is poison in the monarchy. Charles sat in silence, staring at the papers. His mind raced. Should they order another test? Should they risk exposure by widening the circle of people involved? Or should they bury this file, pretend it never existed, and pray the whispers would die? But whispers don't die. They grow. They spread. They consume. And so, even as Charles and Harry sat there, numb from the shock of inconclusive results, the palace walls seemed to tremble with the weight of what was to come. Because the truth, whatever it was, refused to stay buried. The dreaded phone call had not brought clarity. It had brought chaos. And the next step? The decision whether to test again, whether to dig deeper into the shadows, would determine everything. Because the first test was inconclusive. But the second? The second would reveal something no one was ready to face. And when that result came, it would change the royal family forever. The first test had left the palace in chaos. Inconclusive. One word that did nothing to silence the whispers. One word that only fanned the flames. For Charles, it was the worst possible outcome. For Harry, it was unbearable. For Meghan, it was betrayal personified. And for the monarchy itself, it was a storm cloud that refused to drift away. But uncertainty cannot last forever. The palace could not afford it. Doubt corrodes faster than truth ever can. And so, a decision was made, a second test. Quietly, swiftly, this time, with no room for irregularities. Arrangements were made under even stricter secrecy than before. Only a handful of people knew. New doctors were selected, sworn to silence with threats of exile from royal service. A different lab, this time in another country, was chosen. The samples would travel further, cross borders, and be tested by experts with no clue who the subjects were. Harry resisted at first. He was furious, convinced the monarchy was trying to trap him, humiliate him, brand him as a fool before the world. But even he, in his quietest moments, could not silence the doubt that haunted him. That gnawing whisper, what if? And so, reluctantly, he agreed. If a test had to be done, let it be done right. The days that followed were suffocating. Imagine living under a roof where everyone avoids your eyes, where silence follows you down the corridors, where even the maids stop mid-conversation when you enter the room. That was the atmosphere around Harry, around Charles, around everyone. For Meghan, the tension was a firestorm. She reportedly raged in private, accusing the family of conspiring against her, of weaponizing science to tear her apart. Yet at the same time, she projected calm in public, smiling for cameras, carefully arranging appearances that painted her as serene, untouchable, above it all. But insiders whispered of slammed doors, of late-night arguments, of icy glares that froze Harry to the core. And then, one morning, the call came. The same secure line. The same hushed urgency. Only this time, there was no inconclusive verdict. Charles received the call first. He sat alone in his study, the curtains drawn, the light dim. His aide handed him the phone, his voice tight. "Sir, it's the lab." Charles lifted the receiver, his hand trembling. "Your Majesty," the voice said, formal yet clinical. "The results are in. They are clear. Clear." That single word drained the blood from Charles's face. The voice continued, each syllable landing like a hammer. "The child's DNA does not match the profile provided for Prince Harry." Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Charles couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He closed his eyes, the phone still pressed to his ear, as though hoping he had misheard. But the voice repeated, steady, merciless, "There is no paternal match. No match." Archie Harrison was not Prince Harry's biological son. Charles dropped the phone. It clattered against the desk, the sound shattering the stillness of the room. He pressed his hands to his face, whispering to himself, "God help us. God help us all." Harry was summoned immediately. He stormed into the room, demanding answers, his face red with fury and fear. Charles said nothing at first. He simply handed his son the report. Harry read it, line by line. His hands shook so violently he could barely keep the pages steady. His lips parted, but no sound came. And then, suddenly, he roared. A guttural sound of rage and pain, the kind that comes from the deepest place in the human soul. He threw the papers across the room, fists slamming onto the desk, tears burning in his eyes. "This is a lie," he shouted. "It's rigged. You did this. You've always wanted to destroy me. To destroy us." His words spilled like fire, directed not just at Charles, but at the entire institution. Charles tried to calm him, but his own voice cracked. "Harry, listen to me. This is science. This is truth." But Harry would not listen. To him, truth was betrayal. Truth was a weapon, wielded by those who had never accepted Meghan, who had never embraced their marriage, who had always waited for it to collapse. And Meghan? When Harry told her, she was ice and fire all at once. Ice in her glare, fire in her fury. She denied, deflected, accused. "They want to destroy me," she said. "They've fabricated this to take Archie away, to erase me from history." But denial couldn't erase what was written in black and white. The second test was clear. Now pause here, and imagine you are Harry. You've built your entire new life on your role as husband and father. You've given up your country, your titles, your military roles, all for your family. And now, that foundation is ripped from under you. Would you cling tighter? Would you fight the evidence? Or would you collapse under the weight of it all? Harry clung. He refused to believe. But deep down, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, doubt began to carve into him like a blade. And Charles? He was destroyed in his own way. Because for him, this wasn't just about Harry. It was about the monarchy itself. A child presented to the world as royal blood, yet proven not to be. The scandal, if revealed, could dwarf anything in the past century. Abdication, divorce, affairs, none of it compared. This was the ultimate betrayal of the crown. The palace scrambled. Advisors debated furiously. Should the results be buried, hidden forever in locked vaults? Should the monarchy confront the truth head-on, risking annihilation? Or should they find a third way, containing the damage, controlling the narrative, spinning the scandal into something survivable? But control is a fragile illusion, because in the shadows, others already knew. The circle of secrecy had widened with each test, each courier, each lab technician. And secrets, once shared, never stay hidden for long. The results were clear. The palace was trembling. And yet, the most dangerous part of this saga was still to come. Because the question was no longer just about paternity. It was about what would happen when the truth escaped into the light. And escape it would. But who would be the one to leak it? When the truth came crashing down, Meghan Markle's reaction was as fierce as the storm itself. Harry was still reeling, pacing rooms like a man possessed, his fists clenched, his breath shallow. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't think straight. The words, "no paternal match," rang in his ears like a curse he couldn't silence. But Meghan? Meghan didn't crumble. She didn't cry. She ignited. The moment Harry told her, her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, and her entire body stiffened like steel. To her, this wasn't just a revelation. It was an attack. It wasn't about science. It wasn't about DNA. It was about war. "Of course," she hissed, pacing back and forth. "Of course they would do this. They've hated me from the moment I stepped into that palace. They never wanted me here. They never wanted Archie. And now, look, they've manufactured their proof." Harry, desperate for comfort, expected tears, expected Meghan to collapse into his arms. Instead, he got fire. She lashed out, not at him, but at everyone else. "Charles, the courtiers, the monarchy itself. This is their weapon. They've used it to try to erase me, to erase us. Don't you see, Harry? This was their plan all along." To Meghan, the results weren't truth. They were sabotage, a conspiracy designed to exile her once and for all. And she wasn't about to let that happen. From that moment, Meghan's fury became strategy. She knew how the game was played. She had seen how public perception could be bent, twisted, reshaped. She had built her own image before the palace, survived Hollywood's cruelty, navigated the media like a pro. And now, she turned those skills against the very institution she once joined. Her first move was to sow doubt. She told Harry the results were tampered with. "Think about it," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through his haze of despair. "Who handled those samples? Who carried them? Who picked the labs? Do you really believe they weren't manipulated? This isn't about DNA, it's about control." Her second move was to rally Harry's emotions. She reminded him of the countless times the palace had undermined him. "They never trusted you, Harry. They always saw you as the spare, the mistake, the weak one. And now they've attacked the one thing you hold dearest. Are you really going to let them win?" Harry, broken and vulnerable, clung to her words. His anger shifted, not at her, but at them. The palace became the enemy. Charles became the betrayer. The monarchy became the monster. And Meghan? She positioned herself as his shield, his warrior, his only ally in a world determined to destroy him. But Meghan's strategy didn't stop with Harry. She knew the bigger battlefield was public opinion. If the results ever leaked, and she suspected they would, the narrative had to be ready. She began drafting lines, rehearsing responses, imagining interviews. "If they want a war," she told Harry, "then we'll give them one. And I promise you, we'll win." Behind closed doors, Meghan was relentless. Reports say she contacted her closest confidants, allies in the media, trusted friends in Hollywood. Calls were made, messages sent. "Be ready," she warned them. "They're coming for me, but I won't go quietly." And all the while, Harry's turmoil deepened. He oscillated between despair and rage, between wanting to believe Meghan and fearing the evidence. One moment he whispered, "Maybe it's true." The next he shouted, "No, it can't be true." His mind became a battlefield, his heart a casualty. But Meghan's voice was constant, steady, commanding. "Don't doubt me, Harry. Doubt them. Now pause for a moment and put yourself in Meghan's shoes. Imagine the world questioning the legitimacy of your child. Imagine headlines dissecting every feature, speculating about every relationship, painting you as a liar. Would you crumble? Or would you fight back with everything you had?" Meghan chose to fight, and her fight was ruthless. Her fury wasn't just about protecting Archie, it was about survival. She knew what the monarchy was capable of. She had seen how they treated outsiders, how they buried inconvenient truths, how they silenced those who didn't conform. She refused to be their victim. But here's the twist. Meghan's fight wasn't only about survival. It was also about power. Because in crisis lies opportunity. If she could control the narrative, if she could turn herself into the victim of a royal smear campaign, she could gain sympathy, influence, leverage. And leverage, in Meghan's world, was everything. So the plan was set. Deny, deflect, attack, paint the monarchy as the villain, herself as the target, and Harry as the loyal husband standing by her side. The story would no longer be about DNA. It would be about persecution, about love under siege, about a couple fighting against an archaic institution determined to crush them. But behind that strategy was fury. Raw, burning fury. Fury at Charles. Fury at the courtiers. Fury at anyone who dared doubt her. Meghan's anger wasn't the kind that faded. It was the kind that hardened, sharpened, and waited for the right moment to strike. And strike she would. Because the truth was out now, at least within the palace. The test had spoken. The walls of Windsor were trembling. And Meghan knew the next battle wasn't about science. It was about exposure. The only question was, who would speak first? Would it be the monarchy, trying to bury her under scandal? Would it be a leaker, eager to cash in on the biggest royal secret in decades? Or would it be Meghan herself, seizing control of the story before anyone else could twist it? One thing was certain, the war had begun. And as Meghan stared into the mirror that night, her reflection lit by the dim glow of a single lamp, she whispered to herself, "They'll regret ever crossing me." But what she didn't know was that the next move wouldn't come from her. It would come from inside the palace. And when it did, it would make the walls shake. The crown is heavy. Heavier than gold, heavier than jewels. It carries centuries of history, tradition, expectation, and secrets. King Charles had carried its weight for only a short time, yet the burden already pressed so hard on his shoulders that it bent his very spirit. But never had it felt heavier than now. When the DNA results came in, when the words, "no paternal match," struck like thunder in his study, Charles did what monarchs are never supposed to do. He broke. The public will never see this side of him. To the world, Charles is stoic, measured, the dutiful king who finally sits upon the throne after decades of waiting. But behind closed doors, he is a man with fears, doubts, and cracks. And that night, the cracks split wide open. But the most chilling part? Some insiders claimed there were quiet conversations among senior advisors about contingency plans. What would happen if the whispers proved true? What would it mean for Archie's titles, for the line of succession, for the monarchy's credibility in the eyes of the people? The very fact that such conversations allegedly took place shows how deeply the unease had spread. And then came the breaking point. One day, as Charles sifted through documents in his private office, a file landed on his desk. Slim, unassuming, marked with nothing more than a seal. A courier had delivered it discreetly, bypassing usual channels. Inside, according to sources, were not just rumors, not just whispers, but actual documents. Documents that suggested steps had already been taken to test the truth. The file contained references to DNA. 3 letters that carry the weight of science, certainty, and devastation. DNA. For Charles, it was a moment of paralysis. He stared at the file, pale, his heart pounding. If the contents were accurate, this was no longer speculation, it was confirmation. Confirmation that the whispers had substance. Confirmation that the monarchy might be facing a scandal greater than any in living memory. Now pause again and ask yourself, what would you do if you were in Charles's shoes? Would you rip the file open immediately, desperate for answers? Or would you push it aside, terrified of what the truth might reveal? Charles reportedly did neither, at least, not right away. Instead, he sat in silence, the envelope before him, knowing that opening it could change not just his son's life, but the future of the entire monarchy. Because inside that file was the beginning of the end of deniability. And once the truth was uncovered, there would be no going back. The whispers had finally become tangible, and the walls of the palace were about to tremble. But if Charles thought this was the climax, he was wrong. Because what lay ahead wasn't just evidence. It was a revelation so shocking that even the king himself wasn't prepared. And that revelation was coming, whether he was ready or not. 3 letters. Just 3 simple letters on a page. D-N-A. Yet they carried the weight of an empire. King Charles stared at the envelope on his desk as though it were radioactive. He had faced angry crowds, survived public scandals, endured decades of criticism. But this small file, shook him in a way nothing else ever had. Why? Because the monarchy could endure many things, affairs, divorces, financial controversies. But it could not endure a question mark over its bloodline. Blood is the monarchy's currency. Without certainty in lineage, crowns lose their meaning, thrones become chairs, and kings become men stripped of myth. Charles sat frozen in his chair, hands pressed tightly against the oak armrests, his face drained of color. To his left, the grandfather clock ticked with cruel indifference, each chime echoing his hesitation. Open it, burn it, pretend it never arrived? The decision weighed heavier than the crown itself. Let's rewind slightly to understand how such a file even found its way to the king's desk. According to insiders, palace advisors had quietly been exploring options for months. The whispers had grown too loud, too persistent. Trusted doctors and private investigators were allegedly approached. Not officially, not on record, just cautious feelers sent out in the dark. And somehow, someone had moved forward with testing. That testing, how, where, and by whom, remained shrouded in secrecy. But the fact was undeniable. Evidence now existed. Results, conclusions, sealed findings. The whispers had taken physical form, ink on paper, science on display. Charles wasn't alone in his torment. Reports suggest Harry himself had grown suspicious, though not in the way most people think. Harry's suspicion wasn't about Archie, it was about the palace. He feared plots, manipulation, people working behind his back. His paranoia deepened after he and Meghan withdrew from senior royal duties. To Harry, the idea that his family might orchestrate something to discredit him wasn't far-fetched. It was expected. So when word trickled back to him that tests had been done, his fury exploded. He accused aides of betrayal, raged at his father for even entertaining the idea, and clung desperately to his role as Archie's protector. But anger doesn't erase results. The file was real, and it sat on Charles's desk like a snake coiled to strike. Inside, palace corridors buzzed with nervous energy. Courtiers whispered in corners, lowering their voices whenever footsteps approached. Some swore they'd seen Charles pacing at night, muttering to himself, unable to sleep. Others said Harry was avoiding family gatherings, Meghan tightening her circle tighter than ever, refusing to let anyone near Archie without her approval. Meanwhile, the press kept circling. Tabloids hinted at major revelations brewing behind palace gates. Foreign outlets speculated more boldly, unrestrained by Britain's libel laws. A royal bombshell, one headline teased. Bloodline at risk, another declared. Though the palace issued no statements, the silence only deepened suspicion. Imagine being a fly on the wall in those days. You'd see senior advisors debating frantically. Should the king acknowledge the file? Should it be locked away forever? Should Harry be told, or was it safer to bury the truth? You'd hear voices clashing, some insisting the monarchy's survival demanded absolute clarity, others arguing that even if true, exposure would be catastrophic. And in the middle of it all was Charles, paralyzed between duty and love. A father who wanted to shield his son from pain, and a monarch who knew that ignoring the truth could one day destroy everything. Let me ask you, what would you do in that position? If you had to choose between protecting your family or protecting an entire institution that spans centuries, which would you sacrifice? Charles wrestled with that question as the envelope sat unopened before him. His hands hovered above it more than once. But every time, he pulled back. Opening it meant certainty. And certainty, in this case, might be worse than doubt. But fate has a cruel way of forcing action. Because not long after the file's arrival, word reached Harry. Not through Charles, not through an advisor, but through a leak. Someone, whether out of loyalty to Harry or spite against Charles, let slip that evidence existed. Harry confronted his father, his voice reportedly trembling with rage. You think I'm not Archie's father? After everything? After all we've been through? Charles, cornered, could no longer deny the existence of the file. The confrontation was said to be explosive, voices raised, emotions raw. Charles insisted he hadn't ordered the test himself, that he was as much in the dark as Harry. But Harry wasn't convinced. To him, it was betrayal of the highest order. And yet, even Harry couldn't resist the pull of the truth. As much as he resented the whispers, as much as he despised the palace machinery, some part of him needed certainty. Because doubt, once planted, grows like a weed. And the file was there, ready to either silence or confirm the most devastating rumor of his life. This was no longer about whispers in corridors. It was about cold, clinical science. The next step was unavoidable. The file had to be opened. The results had to be read. And once read, they could never be unread. Imagine that moment again. Charles, Harry, perhaps a trusted aide or two, gathered in a dimly lit room. Curtains drawn, phones confiscated, every precaution taken to prevent leaks. On the table, the file. In the air, suffocating tension. Harry's jaw clenched, Charles's hands shaking. Meghan nowhere to be seen, but her influence palpable in every corner. The silence before the storm. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, your heartbeat louder than the clock on the wall. And then, finally, the envelope was opened. The pages slid out. Eyes scanned the words. And in that instant, faces went pale. Because the results contained within did not bring relief. They brought shock. Shock that left the king, the prince, and the monarchy itself trembling. But this was only the beginning. Because what those results revealed wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark that lit a firestorm no one could control. And the next chapter of this saga would expose more than anyone dared imagine. It began in silence. No press releases. No grand declarations. Just a quiet decision made behind closed doors. A DNA test would be carried out, but under absolute secrecy. The kind of secrecy only a palace, with its centuries of practice in burying uncomfortable truths, could enforce. The question was simple, but its implications were earth-shattering. Was Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor truly Prince Harry's son? Arranging such a test wasn't easy. Royals live in a goldfish bowl, watched, analyzed, photographed. Every move sparks speculation. If word got out that a DNA test was being conducted, the fallout would begin before the results even arrived. So it had to be done discreetly, almost like an intelligence operation. Trusted intermediaries were contacted. Private labs, not public hospitals, were considered. The chain of custody had to be airtight, yet invisible. And then came the trickiest question of all: how to obtain a sample. Whose DNA would be tested? Archie's, obviously. But who would provide it? Meghan? Harry? A doctor? Or would it be taken without knowledge, without consent, in a way that left no fingerprints, literally or figuratively? This was the palace's dilemma. Inside Harry's mind, a different storm was brewing. He was torn in two directions. On one side, fury, rage at his family for daring to question him, for treating Archie as though he were some lab experiment rather than a child. On the other side, doubt, the whisper in the back of his mind that asked the one question he couldn't silence. What if they're right? That whisper tormented him in the dead of night. He would pace rooms, stare at Archie as he slept, search for resemblances in the boy's features. Sometimes he convinced himself, yes, that's Diana's nose. That's my eyes. There's no question. Other times, doubt clawed back. And every time Meghan caught him staring too long, she would smile a little too tightly, as though she knew exactly what he was thinking and hated him for it. For Charles, the process was colder, more clinical. He wasn't thinking as a grandfather, but as a monarch. This wasn't just a family matter. It was an institutional crisis. The crown's credibility rested on clarity. And Charles knew, from a lifetime of watching scandals consume the monarchy, that uncertainty was a cancer. Left untreated, it spreads. So the machinery was set in motion. Arrangements were made, contacts called, couriers dispatched. The fewer people involved, the better. Trusted medical advisors were sworn to silence under threat of career-ending consequences. A private lab was selected, its location kept secret even from most senior aides. The night the sample was taken, the palace atmosphere was suffocating. No one spoke above a whisper. Guards turned their eyes away, as though pretending not to notice. A small kit was delivered in a plain envelope. It contained swabs, sterile packaging, coded labels. No names, no identifying marks. Only numbers. In science, anonymity is protection. But here's where the story takes its most chilling turn. There are conflicting accounts about how Archie's DNA was collected. Some say it was taken during a routine medical check, with neither Meghan nor Harry fully aware. Others insist Meghan consented, playing her own game of strategy, eager to prove the doubters wrong. And still others whisper that it wasn't Archie's sample at all, that something far murkier took place, with samples swapped or stolen. Who do you believe? The truth remains buried under layers of secrecy. But what we do know is this: a sample was sent. Quietly, efficiently, with no trace linking it back to the palace. Packed, sealed, and shipped under the cloak of night, it was delivered to a discreet facility where technicians, unaware of the identities involved, would run their tests. To them, it was just another case. But to the monarchy, it was everything. Back at the palace, time became unbearable. Days felt like weeks, weeks like months. Charles paced corridors, his temper shorter than usual. Harry withdrew further, snapping at staff, avoiding calls from family members. Meghan maintained her public poise, but those close to her claimed she was icy behind closed doors, furious at the invasion, defiant in her insistence that she controlled the narrative. And the media? They sensed something. They didn't know what, but they felt the tremor beneath the palace floor. Headlines spoke of strange absences, unusual tensions, mystery meetings. Speculation ran wild, but no one guessed the truth, not yet. Finally, the call came. The results were ready. The file was prepared, coded, sealed, and couriered with the same discretion as before. Delivered directly to the palace, it landed on Charles's desk, the very file that made his face go pale. But here's the cliffhanger. No one is entirely certain who provided the DNA in the first place. Was it Meghan, confident and daring the monarchy to test her son? Was it a doctor, pressured into quiet compliance? Was it Harry himself, desperate for clarity despite his anger? Or was it someone else altogether? An insider acting without authorization, setting in motion a chain of events that would tear the family apart? That unanswered question lingers like smoke after fire. Because if the sample didn't come from Archie, or if it was tampered with, the entire scandal takes on a darker, more dangerous edge. And as the file lay before Charles, with Harry demanding answers, one thing was certain. The results were about to set off a bomb no one could defuse. But what those results said would leave everyone reeling. It always begins the same way. A ringing phone in the dead of night, when the world is quiet, when hearts beat faster because no good news ever comes after midnight. That night, the palace was still. Guards stood at their posts, footsteps echoing softly across the gravel outside. Inside, silence pressed against the walls like an invisible weight. And then, the phone rang. Not just any line, but one of the secure numbers. Few had access. Fewer still dared use it without urgent cause. A senior aide picked it up, his face tightening as he listened. He said little, only nodding, eyes darting to the clock on the wall. And then he hung up. The message was simple, almost clinical. The results are in. But those 4 words carried the weight of centuries. Word traveled quickly, though not loudly. No official announcements, no gathering of courtiers. Just whispered instructions. Wake His Majesty. Find the prince. No one else is to know. The palace moved like a machine, smooth but tense, as though every cog feared it might shatter. Charles was in his private chambers when they told him. He had been awake already, unable to sleep, staring at old photographs of Diana, of William and Harry as boys. The moment he heard the words, "The results are in," he closed his eyes, as if bracing for a blow. Harry was harder to reach. He had been drinking, aides whispered later, pacing in his own residence. When the knock came at his door, he snapped, "What now?" But when they told him, his anger turned to silence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He knew. Imagine that walk, Charles and Harry, summoned to a private study in the dead of night. Neither speaking, both aware that words were useless. The air was heavy with everything unsaid. 2 men, father and son, bound by blood, or so they thought, about to learn whether that bond extended to the next generation. On the desk lay the file, still sealed, still waiting. The envelope seemed almost alive, pulsing with menace, daring them to open it. Charles sat first, his hands trembling despite his attempt at composure. Harry remained standing, jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides. For a moment, no one moved. The ticking of the clock grew unbearable, each second a reminder that the truth was there, inches away, yet untouchable. Finally, an aide cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, shall I?" No, Charles's voice cracked like glass. He reached forward, fingers brushing the envelope. He paused, as if the paper burned him. Then, with a deep breath, he tore it open. The room was silent except for the rustle of pages. Charles's eyes moved quickly, then slowed. His face drained of color. He looked up at Harry, but no words came. Only silence. Harry snatched the papers from his father's hand. His eyes scanned the lines, darting back and forth, trying to make sense of the clinical language. And then he stopped. The words hit him like a punch. Inconclusive, further testing required. Not confirmation, not denial, not clarity, just a new kind of torment. What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family was built on a carefully constructed lie? Imagine the cameras flashing, the world cheering, and the headlines screaming with joy when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle first introduced their baby boy, Archie Harrison, to the world. The perfect picture of love, legacy, and continuity. But beneath the polished smiles and curated images, whispers began. Quiet at first, then louder. Whispers that grew into murmurs. Murmurs that erupted into speculation, and speculation that has now, allegedly, reached the most unthinkable conclusion of all. Archie Harrison may not even be Prince Harry's biological son. A shocking claim? Absolutely. But in today's royal world, truth often sounds stranger than fiction. What makes this moment explosive isn't just the rumor. It's the revelation of alleged DNA results that have left both King Charles and Prince Harry themselves pale, shaken, and scrambling for control. Think about it for a moment. 2 of the most powerful figures in the monarchy, staring at papers they wish had never been printed. Why now? Why would such sensitive information come to light at this point in history? And what does it mean for Archie, for Meghan, for Harry, and for the monarchy itself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's be clear. This isn't just another tabloid rumor whispered in a pub or scribbled in the gossip columns. This is the kind of revelation that has the potential to rewrite family bonds, question royal legitimacy, and alter the very future of the crown. And the timing could not be worse. The monarchy has been under relentless strain between scandals, divisions, and the public's ever-watchful eye. Into this fragile moment drops a revelation so powerful that it could shatter not only reputations but entire dynasties. Now picture the setting. Late evening in the palace. Thick curtains drawn to keep out the cold and the curious. Harry sits slouched in a chair, fists clenched, while King Charles paces the room, his usually steady voice cracking under the weight of tension. On the table lies a slim envelope, innocent in appearance, devastating in content. A manila folder, sealed tight, carrying within it the weight of 1,000 years of royal history. And once it is opened, nothing will ever be the same. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before that envelope was torn open, before Charles and Harry's faces turned pale with the realization of what they were holding, this story had already been brewing for years. Some say it began the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the royal world, disrupting tradition, redefining roles, and igniting battles. Others argue it began even earlier, during Harry's own rebellious youth, when questions about his choices and his destiny swirled endlessly in the press. But if you look closely, you'll see the threads weaving together, forming a tapestry of intrigue that would one day culminate in a single moment of truth. Why does this matter? Because the monarchy is not just a family, it's an institution. Its strength relies on bloodlines, tradition, and the trust of the people. The idea of legitimacy, of knowing exactly who, is not just ceremonial. It's the very foundation of its existence. If there's even a whisper of doubt about that, the walls begin to crack. And once the cracks appear, they don't just vanish. They widen, they splinter, they bring the whole structure down. And that's why this story, this alleged DNA result, is not just gossip. It's a dagger pointed at the heart of the crown. But let's pause here for a moment. Ask yourself this. If you were Prince Harry, how would you react to being told that your son, the child you've loved, protected, and paraded as the future of your bloodline, might not actually be yours? Would you rage? Would you deny? Would you break down, question everything, or stand by defiantly in the face of it all? And what if you were King Charles, already carrying the burden of the crown, already battling criticism and doubt, and now confronted with the possibility that your grandson, the supposed future heir of your blood, is not connected to you at all? What then? This isn't just a story of DNA. This is a story of legacy, betrayal, fear, and survival. It's about the very human emotions that hide behind royal titles. The jealousy, the paranoia, the desperation to hold on to control in a world that constantly seeks to rip it away. It's about how even the most powerful can crumble when faced with the raw, undeniable truth. And make no mistake, the stakes here are enormous. For Meghan Markle, the implications are life-altering. Was she complicit in this deception, or is she the victim of a smear campaign so ruthless it would make history books blush? For Harry, the question isn't just about paternity, it's about his entire identity. The man who fled the royal family for love now faces the ultimate test of whether that love was built on truth or illusion. For Charles, this isn't just about family drama. It's about the very survival of the monarchy itself. Now, think back to those photographs of Archie as a newborn. The world scrutinized his tiny features, debating whether he had Diana's eyes or Harry's hair. Some swore they saw Markle genes. Others insisted he was pure Windsor. Every frame analyzed, every smile dissected. But what if all those debates were missing the real story? What if the truth was hidden in plain sight all along? The royal family has weathered scandals before. From Edward VIII's abdication to Diana's explosive interviews, to the relentless controversies surrounding Prince Andrew. But never has the question of bloodline legitimacy struck so close to the core. This isn't about personal failure or bad behavior. This is about the monarchy's very claim to continuity, Its promise to the people that the line of succession is pure, unbroken, and sacred. Now here we are, with whispers becoming revelations, with envelopes containing truths too heavy to bear. And as King Charles and Prince Harry stare at those DNA results, their faces drained of color, the world waits for answers. What will this mean for Archie? For Meghan? For the monarchy? For all of us who watch this centuries-old institution teeter on the edge of survival? You may think you've heard every royal scandal there is, but trust me, you haven't heard anything like this. And if you think this introduction is shocking, wait until you hear what's next. Because what comes after the opening of that envelope will not just shake the palace walls, it will send shockwaves across the globe. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. But sometimes, when the truth finally emerges, it doesn't set you free. It destroys you. And so, with a pale-faced king and a trembling prince, the envelope was opened. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every great dynasty has its secrets. That's the hook. Secrets buried in vaults, whispered in corridors, hidden in diaries that never see daylight. And the House of Windsor? They have more secrets than most. Yet, nothing could prepare the world, or the family itself, for the kind of secret that might undo centuries of carefully preserved history. Let's rewind to the beginning. The spring of 2019. The world was buzzing with anticipation. Meghan Markle, the glamorous American actress who had captured Prince Harry's heart, was about to give birth. The press camped outside hospitals. Journalists speculated endlessly about due dates, baby names, and even hair color. Would the baby look like Diana? Would it be ginger-haired like Harry? The nation, even the world, held its breath. And then came the announcement. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor had arrived. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed united in joy. The first mixed-race baby born into the British royal family. The child symbolizing a new era, a bridge between tradition and modernity, past and future. His birth was celebrated in headlines across the globe, from New York to Nairobi, from Sydney to Singapore. But if you paid close attention, even in those early days, there were whispers. Not loud, not overt, but subtle. Some royal watchers commented on the unusual secrecy surrounding Meghan's pregnancy. Unlike Kate Middleton, who posed on the hospital steps hours after each of her births, Meghan and Harry shielded the process. No immediate photos outside the Lindo wing. No eager doctors smiling for the cameras. Instead, there was silence, followed by a carefully staged photo call days later. At first, people thought it was simply Meghan and Harry protecting their privacy. Admirable, even. But behind palace doors, according to insiders, the lack of transparency raised questions. Why so secretive? Why break with tradition so completely? Why not allow trusted royal physicians to oversee everything? These questions hung in the air like smoke from a candle, unseen by most, but suffocating to those inside the palace. The debut of Archie only fueled speculation. Some viewers, ever eager for drama, claimed the baby didn't resemble Harry at all. Others whispered he looked nothing like Meghan either. Was it just the nature of newborns, squirmy, red-faced, their features still forming? Or was there something more? Of course, the palace dismissed all such talk as nonsense. Harry beamed like any proud father. Meghan, radiant, held her baby with a mother's warmth. And Charles, oh Charles. He smiled politely for the cameras, as always, while reportedly wondering privately about the future of his bloodline. But as weeks turned into months, those whispers never truly died. Instead, they evolved. Some claimed Meghan's pregnancy bump seemed to shift oddly, fueling conspiracy theories about surrogacy. Others insisted on spotting inconsistencies in the timeline. To the outside world, it was fodder for gossip magazines. Inside the palace, though, every whisper mattered. Every rumor had weight. Because in a family built on lineage, perception is reality. And once doubt creeps in, it becomes a poison. Think about it. The Windsors have survived wars, abdications, divorces, and scandals. But one thing they cannot survive is doubt about their bloodline. Without that, they're not the royal family. They're just another wealthy clan with palaces. And Archie was supposed to represent continuity, stability, the guarantee that the Windsor line would live on through Harry and Meghan's union. Yet behind closed doors, staff spoke of Charles's unease. They spoke of Harry's quick temper whenever questions about Archie arose. They spoke of Meghan's iron grip on information, keeping outsiders at bay, controlling the narrative with precision. Some saw it as protective motherhood. Others saw it as strategy. And then there were the photographs. Every public outing of Archie sparked microscopic analysis. Was his nose too narrow? Was his skin tone too light, too dark? Did he have Harry's chin, Meghan's eyes? The public fascination with royal features is nothing new. Remember how people once debated whether young Prince William looked more like Diana or Charles? But with Archie, the stakes were different. His appearance wasn't just curiosity, it was ammunition. By Archie's first birthday, speculation had hardened into something else. Journalists began to dig deeper. Former friends of Meghan spoke out, some out of loyalty, others out of bitterness. Rumors swirled about past relationships, about timelines that didn't add up, about secrets hidden in plain sight. And through it all, Harry grew more defensive, more distant from his family, and more obsessed with shielding Meghan and Archie from the press. It's worth pausing here and asking, why do secrets like this grip the public so fiercely? Maybe because they expose the humanity behind the crowns and titles. Maybe because they show that even the richest, most powerful families wrestle with the same doubts, the same fears, the same betrayals as the rest of us. And maybe, just maybe, because the stakes are higher. A scandal in your family might ruin a holiday dinner. A scandal in the royal family can shake a nation. And so, as months passed, as Archie grew, as the rift between Harry and the rest of the royals widened, the whispers only grew louder. Inside the palace, aides muttered quietly, "Does Archie really belong to Harry?" It was never said publicly, never acknowledged officially, but the doubt had planted its seed. And once a seed is planted, it grows. Now here's the part that makes you stop and think. If you were in King Charles's shoes, what would you do? Would you dismiss the whispers as malicious nonsense, a product of jealousy and gossip? Or would you secretly, quietly, take steps to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be? That's the dilemma Charles reportedly faced. On one hand, protecting his son and grandson from cruel rumors. On the other, protecting the monarchy from the catastrophic fallout of a hidden truth. And so, slowly, silently, the groundwork was laid for an action no one dared admit publicly: ordering a DNA test. Imagine that moment. A father, king of a nation, grappling with the unthinkable. His son's paternity questioned, his dynasty's legitimacy hanging by a thread. He doesn't want to believe it. He tells himself it's ridiculous. But the whispers won't stop. They circle him in parliament, in newspapers, in conversations overheard at events. And finally, he decides he cannot ignore them any longer. The stage was set. The first steps toward uncovering the truth had been taken. The whispers that began in hospital corridors and tabloids had reached the very heart of the monarchy. And with each passing day, the tension grew thicker, the stakes higher. Because the truth was coming. And when it arrived, it would not come quietly. But before Charles could act decisively, before Harry himself was dragged into the storm, something unexpected happened. Something that landed directly on Charles's desk and forced him to face the whispers head-on. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was evidence. A slim file. A sealed envelope. The first domino in a chain of events that would leave both Charles and Harry pale with disbelief. And once that file was opened, there was no going back. Whispers. That's how it always begins in royal circles. Not shouts, not declarations, but whispers. The palace thrives on them, fears them, and sometimes, reluctantly, acts on them. In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, secrets echo louder than footsteps. And when those whispers begin to swirl around something as sensitive as the paternity of a royal child, they cannot be ignored. Think about this. For centuries, the monarchy has lived and died by bloodline. Entire wars have been fought over who was truly the legitimate heir. From the Wars of the Roses to the abdication of Edward VIII, history shows us one unshakable truth. Legitimacy is the crown's lifeline. Without it, the throne collapses into rubble. So when palace staff, advisors, and even extended family members began muttering doubts about Archie Harrison's resemblance to Prince Harry, it wasn't just idle gossip. It was a potential earthquake beneath the monarchy's foundation. Let's go back to those early days again, but this time behind the curtains. Picture the atmosphere at the palace. Grand staircases, portraits of ancestors staring down with stern expressions, and in the air, unease. Several courtiers noticed things they couldn't quite explain. The secrecy around Meghan's medical care. The lack of official documentation compared to previous royal births. The fact that no royal doctor could firmly say they'd been present at the delivery. On its own, any of these might be brushed aside. But together, they painted a troubling picture. One former aide, speaking only in hushed tones, reportedly said, "It was as if everything was staged, not organic, not the way it usually is." Another muttered, "We were told to follow orders and not ask questions." But questions hung in every room. And then there were the family members themselves. Princess Anne, known for her bluntness, was said to have raised an eyebrow at certain details. Even William, though careful not to speak openly, was rumored to have shared concerns privately with close friends. Whether out of genuine suspicion or simply the weight of pressure, these small sparks fueled the fire of speculation. But it wasn't just family and staff, it was the media. The British tabloids are merciless, always sniffing for scandal, and they picked up on the inconsistencies quickly. Why were there no official photos of Meghan leaving the hospital? Why did Archie's birth certificate contain odd details that didn't align with past protocols? Why did Harry bristle so aggressively whenever journalists asked the simplest questions about his son? Some headlines were subtle, royal privacy or royal secrecy. Others were bold, what is the palace hiding? The narrative was shifting, and once the media sensed blood, they refused to let go. Every photograph of Archie became a battleground. Social media buzzed with side-by-side comparisons. Was that nose really Harry's? Did those eyes look Windsor? Or was it all too convenient to dismiss? Now, pause for a moment and imagine you're Harry. You've grown up in the royal fishbowl, your every mistake magnified. You fought hard to shield Meghan from what you saw destroy your mother. And now, people are questioning the one thing you hold most sacred, your child. How would you react? You'd lash out. You'd rage. You'd do anything to protect your wife and son. And Harry did just that. He confronted the press at every turn, cut off friends who dared to speculate, and grew more distant from the family he felt was doubting him. But here's the twist. His anger didn't silence the whispers. It amplified them. Because in the royal world, defensiveness often signals guilt. And King Charles? He was torn. A father who wanted to defend his son, yet a monarch who understood that whispers about legitimacy could spiral into a national crisis. Imagine Charles pacing his private study at Clarence House, glancing at portraits of monarchs past, and thinking, what if the unthinkable is true? What if Harry has been deceived? What if the crown itself is at risk? The tension became so thick that even routine family gatherings grew strained. Small remarks turned into landmines. If Meghan skipped an event, whispers bloomed. If Archie wasn't present, speculation flared. Every absence, every gesture, every silence was dissected.